A very warm welcome to all of you. I am Christiane Wopin and your moderator for today. I was chair of the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies until end of May. At the University of Cologne, I'm director of the Interfaculty Center, CERES. So let's start into our discussion on promoting fundamental values in research and innovation globally. Did you use any digital application with an AI-driven algorithmic system today, such as a Google search with online advertisement? Did you think about gene editing of plants, animals, or human beings during the last weeks? Or are you engaged in research with international partners? I am sure all of you have your own experience that research and innovation gets more and more a global endeavor that is promising and can foster progress, health, and welfare for societies around the world, especially when it aims at fulfilling one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But it also brings challenges with it because there are different ethical standards and regulations in different countries and regions. What can we do about it? Well, the European Commission engages strongly in fostering a global approach to cooperation in research and innovation that is strategic, open, and reciprocal. The Commission published a communication on this global approach in May this year that is strong, supportive, and ambitious. We will discuss today what these promises and challenges are and what can be done to promote fundamental values in research and innovation globally. You can join the discussion by asking questions or giving comments that we will take up during the last 15 minutes of this session. Please, for reasons of fairness, keep your intervention as short as possible. We have three distinguished experts with us. First, there's Professor Doris Schröder, Professor for Moral Philosophy and Director of the Center for Professional Ethics at the University of Central Lancashire, School of Sport and Health Sciences. Second, we have Professor Yi Zheng from the China-UK Research Center for AI Ethics and Governance and the Research Center for AI Ethics and Safety at Beijing Academy of Artificial Intelligence and Chinese Academy of Science. And third, we have Professor Julian Kinderlehrer, Emeritus Professor for Intellectual Property Law at the IP Law and Policy Research Unit, University of Cape Town. He was chair of the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies until 2017. So I start with Julian. Just 2 weeks ago, our European Group on Ethics published its last statement on values for the future, the role of ethics in European and global governance. During the last years, we worked on AI and on genome editing, amongst others. What is, from your point of view, important to have in mind when fostering research and innovation on an international level? Please, Julian, go ahead.
Thank you, Christiane. There is a perception that research is undertaking with cognizance of national priorities. I don't believe this is true, actually, except that funding priorities impose restrictions on that which can be undertaken. In most instances, researchers may not even be aware of the values that underpin social acceptance of new technologies. Many scientists may well be working in areas unfamiliar to them, artificial intelligence designers and coders addressing biological problems, for example. Thought should be given to causing them to pause and think about what the implications of their research are. Firstly, in relation to the impact of the results of their research on society at large. For example, the insertion of pig or cattle genes into plants, which in the future may become food products. Secondly, where they are working on development of new technologies, artificial intelligence for autonomous systems, which then can be used for weapons, and has been used actually, where decisions impacting on lives are made at a distance or made by the artificial system itself. So we've got to think about how we ensure that the values of the society are taken into account right at the beginning of the research, not at a late stage when nothing can be done about it.
Thank you very much, Julian. That are very important points already from the social point of view. So I go to Doris and follow up on this by asking, what do you think that researchers, innovators, and funders should aim for when cooperating in order to promote research and innovation in an ethical way, as Julian just pointed out?
Thank you very much, Christiane. We just heard in the plenary from the Director of International Collaboration, Ms. Russo, that shared values are very important in international collaboration. And what drives international collaboration that is ethical, according to research we have undertaken, are four very particular values, namely fairness, respect, care, and honesty. When these four values are part of international collaborations, our research has found that things are going well. If not, then the danger of ethics dumping looms. So ethics dumping is, for instance, the application of double standards in research. When a real-life example, invasive research on the great apes is taken from the UK to Kenya, for instance, or research with a control arm that wouldn't be allowed in the US is taken to India. These are examples of ethics dumping where the values of fairness, respect, care, and honesty are not respected. Now, this is not the only problem in terms of what happens when these values aren't respected. There is also, for instance, the problem of sharing the burdens and the benefits unfairly. We had a case where valuable samples were taken from China to the US and commercialized there. This was also a problem for international collaboration. So to close with one sentence, it's fairness, respect, care, and honesty that lead to equitable partnerships in international collaboration.
Thank you very much, Doris, also for the examples that let us see where the problems lie, and they are throughout the whole research process. I know that Yi Zheng worked also on these intercultural approaches and these international cooperation. So my question to you is, what do you see as the main problem for ethical international collaborations?
Thank you. So I would like to make 2 points. One is that we should avoid misunderstanding. So in many of the international standards formation process, let's say in AI, so people were thinking that, oh, maybe the Chinese researchers does not really care about privacy and other stuff. And then when we developed the Beijing AI principles, and then there's a report on technology review saying that, oh, it seems that in the Beijing AI principles, human rights and privacy has been explicitly discussed. Well, in this case, it seems that we should engage with Chinese researchers. Well, actually, my observation is that in China, we never actually forget to talk about the privacy and rights part. So that is, of course, that is always our central topic for ethical AI development. So that kind of misunderstanding actually, in some cases, make not so friendly bottleneck for international collaboration. And my other point of view is to really that we need to learn from each other. Well, let's say in China, in some of the companies, they develop emotion recognition in the classroom, which was hated by everybody in China, actually. And then the Ministry of Science and Technology said, stop it. So you cannot do that. But this is happening in China, and then actually 2 months later, in the United States, at Carnegie Mellon, people say that, oh, we can make a step forward, not only use emotion recognition, but also gait recognition to recognize what people do in the classroom. I mean, this is horrible. It happens somewhere in the world, and then later you see it in other places, and people never learn from each other. So misunderstanding and don't learn from each other. Well, I think these are the bottlenecks for international collaboration in ethical scientific research. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. But do you have, just to follow up on that, do you have an idea how to keep people in touch with each other and to frame structures and processes that mitigate these misunderstandings? And yeah, just a question to you again, Yi.
Oh, okay. So I think actually we need to share the experiences in a more international way. And then when you don't really understand the culture, we need to make efforts to really to move things forward, not to to guess whether they care about it or not. So we need to talk to each other in a more frequent way, and then in many of the Asian countries, maybe we could share those experiences in many ways, not only to have translations, but in many cases, what I feel is that the media report focus on many of the negative cases while ignoring how do we solve these problems. And in many cases, they actually report on what the companies do in a certain geolocation and misinterpret what the company do as a national strategy or national viewpoints. And that's what I think is the horrible way for collaboration. So we need to remove these misunderstandings in this way, I guess.
So that's kind of a plea for having best practice models and having these talks and the structures and processes of being in touch with each other and of communicating as part of the funding criteria, for example. That could be a way forward as well. But let's come back.
See what really happens somewhere else in the world. And also, as you said, we should have efforts really bridge the efforts together to have the same problems and have the discussions together and really to share what's really happening here, what can be learned from each other, to go into the details, I guess.
Yeah, that's really important. But let's come back again to something that Doris said, and I want to ask this question to Julian first, because as an expert in intellectual property law, you obviously have an overview on how to make something economically fruitful on its way from research to innovation. And what is your experience regarding the hot topic of sharing benefits from research in an ethically sound way? Because there cannot only be misunderstandings on the research process, but also on the impact it should have on societies afterwards.
Thanks, Christian. That's a really important question. We have to be aware that an enormous amount of public money has been used in the production of new products and their development. In many instances, the initial research is primarily funded through grants from governments or charities. That is actually public money intended to be used for the benefit of society. In the case of the vaccines, it's argued that in some of them, over 95% of the input of money was from the public purse. The transition from the research lab to the production of a new medicine, including all the necessary trials, is extremely expensive and usually is funded through private funds. But it does involve the public as volunteers. So we've got to be aware that the public input into new medicines, I'm taking that as an example, is enormous. Should there be some sort of payback to the public? What about being open about that which is being done and where things have worked as expected or not? Both with colleagues and with the public, we aren't necessarily open. So the change from research to development to actually using products needs to be thought about rather more carefully than it has been in the past, but because we are all paying for it. But we go on to the question as to whether relaxation of patent rules could benefit society during a pandemic. It was argued by the President of the United States that we should relax the patent rules. The EU at the moment is resisting that. Let's be honest, is the bottleneck to the provision of vaccines due to the assertion of patent rights? I think not. In addition, there may be thousands of patents associated with the introduction of a new product, with each patenter providing a license. That there should be some form of patent pool is obvious, and it's not happening. We should analyze where the bottlenecks are and how to overcome them in a cost-effective manner for the benefit of society at large. Let's take an example. Where nearly 60% of all the UK population is currently vaccinated. We could get up to a very, very large proportion of the population. But it won't help at all if the virus mutates in an adjacent unvaccinated population. How do we address that? India and South Africa have asked that the patent rules be relaxed. I'm not sure that would help, but at least we have to start thinking about how we can provide new technologies to society to benefit both those in the countries where you can get the technology and those where they can't. I think that's as close an answer as I can give you, Christian.
Yeah, but that are already major problems that you address. I'm just coming from a panel from the International Science Council with the COVID-19 scenario project, and we discussed the different scenarios for vaccine distribution and vaccine access for Africa especially, because Africa is the country or the continent with the least access to vaccines. And we don't have the international structures and rules and regulations and financing systems to really address the pandemic from an international perspective. And coming back to this and to the experience that Doris has with setting ethical standards internationally, because you chaired or you had the global conduct of research with poor resource settings, and you mentioned the 4 values of fairness, respect, care, and honesty. What do you think? What is your view on benefit sharing, especially regarding research in resource poor settings here?
I'm very glad, Christiane, that you mentioned the word benefit sharing, and twice already, also in Julian's question, because very often benefit sharing is seen as the poor cousin of research ethics and research integrity, in my view. It's partly because research ethics, benefit sharing is a very technical matter for many people. It's to do with traditional knowledge and the Convention on Biodiversity. But really, it's quite simple benefit sharing. Those who contribute to research and innovation and carry burdens and carry risks should really benefit from it. In the past, the progress of science, especially within high-income countries, was always regarded as sufficient. But if you undertake research, as today in our global world happens more and more, in a resource-poor setting, and say there will be progress of science, that's not enough if the results do not reach the people who've carried the burdens and the risks. So benefit sharing in global international cooperation, in my view, should get a lot more energy put into it than it currently is. It, I think, should become an equal sister to research ethics and research integrity, and not just the poor cousin from the country.
And what do you think about this? What we see is, and what Julian pointed out and stressed, is that we have money and financing coming into research from a public area, from different public areas, and that there has a way to be gone to the private sector. And there are so many fundamental values touched, yeah, freedom of research and social innovation, the participating of societies, respect for individuals, and social justice, yeah, in distributive justice terms. So the independent panel for COVID-19 at the WHO said we should have a global financing system for research in these kinds of issues like a pandemic. What do you think about new international structures that could be shaped according to fundamental values that are laid down not only in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, but also on the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights? Do you think we should think more about these international structures and processes, Julian?
Gosh, that's a difficult question. Medical tourism is an example of the problem. Can you identify a system which will assure that all countries follow it? I don't think so. I have a problem with that. So how do we assure ourselves that all countries are going to obey the rules that we set up? I don't know. We can try. Europe is based on a treaty which sets up a series of values. That is not true for most countries in the world. So we have to try and address that as, I think trying to be as open as possible is the only way I can see going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you underline a very important issue of having institutions on the one side or on one level and having the individual commitments and individual cultures and so cultural backgrounds as well. And that's the point where I want to come back to Yi and ask you, what do you recommend to the international research community and also to every researcher in order to agree and to live up to ethical standards, or first to develop the shared ethical standards? So what is your view on this?
Thank you. So my first consideration is related to what Julian said. It's about inclusivity. So when we observe the developing the international consensus, you see that some of the international consensus is actually developed by a small portion of the countries. Well, in that case, those consensus is really hard to do the groundings. So in this case, it would be hard. Let's say for the UNESCO AI ethical recommendations, I think that's a good example of what at least each of the member states were invited for intergovernmental negotiations for the text that the experts developed, and the 24 experts are actually selected from all over the world, and then their text is not the final version, but go for each of the country for international negotiation. So I think we need to include as many countries as possible when we develop the international standards. My second trying would be really try to understand and realize diverse cultures, really learn from each other experiences, just like what I talked about. Well, because so we did a research together with Cambridge, saying that when doing cross-cultural collaboration on AI ethics and governance, actually, in some cases, like what Julian said, maybe the value system is a little bit different, but actually when you go into a specific cases, if the solution to a specific cases can be consistent in some way, although you have different value system, but you can agree on the solutions, that's already a good starting point for ethical international collaboration. My third point is really we need to sit together for collective technical efforts for grounding of ethical standards. My example would be that some international companies claim that, oh, we're we're good in many of the countries. So in EU, we 100% comply with GDPR. I was like, no, that's not possible, because in the technical point of view, let's say data erasure is really hard to do the technical grounding in AI models, although they are rational in database models. So no one is really comply with GDPR in the AI models, because it's technically not possible for now. But actually, those companies just forget to talk about it or avoid to talk about it. Well, actually, the ethical community just don't know that this is technically not possible. In this case, we need to really to sit together for those international researchers in different fields, like from ethics and AI technologies, and to sit together to solve to actually have a solution to ground those ethical values and points into reality. That's a grand challenge for us all, not only for EU, but also for many other countries.
Yeah, and you mentioned the GDPR. That's already an example of how the European regional regulation can impact on international research and cooperation and innovation. And the same is intended for AI regulation. Yeah, this is on the way, and there are first drafts, and there will be a huge discussion, I think, on the global level. And another point I want to stress again and come back to that, because what you say about coming to the same solution by starting from perhaps different values or different understandings for certain values or rights is an experience we have in ethical counseling councils as well. Yeah, we talk about autonomy or self-determination or justice, and we have probably different framings for those fundamental values and concepts. But nevertheless, we can end up in shared standards and shared practical implementation and shared regulation. So I think to distinguish these two levels is important, but it's also important to keep them in mind and that we don't stop to talk about these understandings and concepts and framings. And to just first to understand each other, not to judge from the beginning. Is it possible? Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, I totally agree that I think we should maximize the consensus. That's for sure. That's the first principle that we should have. And secondly, I don't see those different value systems as contradictions. Actually, they're not. Actually, those different value systems actually complement with each other in many of the cases. And you see why this is related to cultures and history of those different geolocations, and why this value system work well in different places, and how these systems can complement with each other instead of compete with each other. That's something we need to have in mind. Thank you.
Yeah. That sounds very fruitful, absolutely. Can I have the questions now from the Slido, please? That's a question to the technical team. Does that work now? Ah, wonderful. So the first one, which advice can you give to researchers engaging in cooperation with, now I have here, with countries not respecting fundamental values? So who wants to address this question, or shall I allocate that?
If you like, I can have a go.
Yes, please go ahead, Doris.
So normally, the collaboration is with researchers in universities. In my experience, it can be a very fruitful collaboration, independent of certain positions from the government. So it's not a black and white situation. You can have fruitful collaborations with researchers in countries where you personally think fundamental values are not respected. So I wouldn't prejudge a collaboration simply by activities of the government.
Julian, please.
Yes, whilst agreeing with that, we've seen in clinical trials that many researchers go to countries where they can do things which they couldn't do in their own country. And there's a lot of evidence for that. The Guatemala experiment in the US was a good example quite a long time ago, but there are many others. How do we assure that researchers in developed countries with so-called values do not use members of the public in countries other than their own in order to skip the laws and regulations which they might be forced to do if they stayed in their own country? We've had that with the vaccine, I think, and we have to think about that rather carefully.
I think that's what Doris said about ethics dumping. Do you want to comment on that further, Doris?
Yes, please, because the question was the other way around. What if well-meaning researchers come to countries where they find problems? Whereas Julian very rightly has pointed out that from high-income countries, researchers can go and seek abroad where is the easiest way to find populations that one can do research about. And that's the opposite. And here, the European Commission has been very proactive. They not only coined the term ethics dumping, but they also asked the group of which I was the leader to write the Global Code of Conduct for Research in Resource-Poor Settings, which opposes ethics dumping categorically and gives guidance on how to do it practically.
And I think when I may add that, when reading this global conduct, I was very impressed about the approaches to involve communities from the beginning. Yeah? It's not only talking researchers with each other or funding organizations and institutions, but bringing in the views and the communities themselves in designing the research and conducting the research and so on. So this participatory approach that we didn't address yet during the last half hour is a very important issue as well. Yeah, also from an ethical point of view and the participatory point of view. May I have the next question, please? So why not adopt an RRI, so a responsible research and innovation perspective, for example, driving innovations on the basis of values rather than evaluating tech which infringes on it? Very good question. We addressed that in our statement on the role of values and ethics in global governance with an ethics by design approach. So Julian, may I give the question to you?
My answer would be yes. That's the whole point of what I think we're trying to address, and which, if you look at the EGE statement on values, you'll see how much we feel this. Ethics by design and ethics in design are absolutely crucial, rather than look at a problem once it's happened. My concern is not here with European research, but with research from individuals who have not respected that which Europe tries to introduce in its value system. And we've seen that too often. So we've got to think about starting research with built-in requirements on the researchers to address the value issues which may arise from their research. We have to be aware, of course, that many researchers think they're just doing a simple project, and they don't think about the consequences if that research was turned into something else. So we have to find ways to think about that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I think one goal of this question or thought in the background was that research is done for a value as well. So you're value driven if you design research, and if you think which question you want to answer with this research, that's already value driven as well. Yeah, it's not only a technical issue. And we have this discussion on ethics by design in artificial intelligence as well, and in all the technology driven processes. So Yi, do you want to comment on that as well as an AI researcher from from the heart?
Thank you. I think in most cases, let's say in AI, for technicians, what they are driving, what they do is more of, in a way of, oh, what we can do by using this kind of technology. Well, this is really problematic in many ways. So you never see efforts like what you should do first and how you can use AI as an enabling technology to push the development of the society first, not to say what you can do. So in the research of AI ethics, many of the efforts were like what you cannot do. So we talk a lot about what you cannot do, but I think in future studies and international cooperations, I like the way that we frame it, that we put the right value first. We see the enabling technology uh, as a tool to help us to realize sustainable development first, and then to investigate under this framework what we shouldn't do. So I think we need a paradigm shift for disruptive technologies like AI. And we need a new starting point to create the values as a driver for their development, not as the other way around.
Is this claiming also for an interdisciplinary team from the beginning?
Exactly. So this is why I would, or in some of the companies in China, they have ethics researchers in their technical team, which I think is a good trying. So it's not only about a checklist at the end. And then let's say for the AI ethics norms, which were developing in China, we were starting from the beginning about the design, research, development, deployment, all the way to services. And for every of the phases, you need to have ethical considerations and technical groundings.
Yeah, thank you very much. May I have the next question, please? I think it will be the last one then. So how can we deal with culturally different forms of reward mechanisms for research and innovation? So I think I give this first to Julian, but I am sure that everyone can say something about that.
Oh, that's difficult. We had a meeting yesterday afternoon discussing human genome editing within an African context and talking about the concept of Ubuntu, which is the difference between an individual giving consent and the community giving consent as one example. In many countries, the different value systems will impact on the manner in which you address societal issues. But this isn't the question. The question is, how do we reward researchers? I'm not sure how. The current grant system doesn't do that. The current grant system looks at the scientific efficiency of a particular project, and then as a secondary consideration in Europe, looks to see those which have been approved are ethically acceptable. So it's a two-step process. I don't know how else you do it.
And we have to take into account that different scientific approaches, and I include humanities here, have different reward mechanisms as well. So talking about international research and innovation means very different cultures within a country between scientific approaches as well.
Yes.
So Doris, do you want to comment on that as well, briefly?
I think there may also be misunderstandings. For instance, I have been working with the community in Southern Africa for the past 20 years, and very often they are misunderstood as requiring cash or money as benefit sharing. But what they've told me very often is lots of researchers come from overseas, ask us questions, obtain our samples, traditional knowledge, and then they never come back. So we don't know what happened to them. So all that they would want in terms of a reward is really stay involved in the research from the beginning to the end. So it's not that different from what one would expect in Europe.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I have to come to the closing round. We just have 5 minutes almost left. And I would like to ask all the panelists to give us 2 sentences to the auditorium and to those who listen to us, what they should take with them when thinking about international research and innovation with shared fundamental values. So Doris, do you want to start?
Yes, what I would like to say is that values can motivate to action. So this is much more than a 90-page ethics form can do. If you want to be an ethical researcher, think that all of us are trying collaboratively to produce fair and equitable research. Don't think of the research ethics people as the enemies, and we all want fairness in research.
Thank you. Yi, do you want to follow up?
Thank you. So my observation would be we need to put values to the first place when we do ethical scientific research, especially international cooperation. Like what you said about the reward, I think this is why we need to put the reward at the back, because let's say in AI research, many of the efforts were put to AI for education and healthcare, ignoring the other pillars of the UN Sustainable Development, because they are not, with a lot of money, which I think we're totally going to the wrong way, because that was the other topics which drive us to the futures. So I think values to be the first and reward to be the last. Thank you.
The reward is a kind of value as well, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So Julian, it's up to you now.
I'm going to look at it from the other side, that is the public. We've got a real problem with fake news and a real problem with ensuring that the real results of science are put both to government, to politicians, to policymakers, and to the public, and be open about it so that we can ensure that people who say vaccines will make you radioactive or magnetic. I like the idea of being a magnetic personality, but nevertheless, we've got to stop that. And we've got to ensure that the results of science, both social science and natural sciences and medical sciences, are there for the public to see, and that the fake news doesn't rule our society.
Yeah, very important point, and pointing also to the role of social media and all these communication channels. So I would like to continue this discussion for another hour, to be honest, because there are so many insights and so many valuable aspects that were mentioned. But this, of course, can only be one piece and then one contribution to a discussion that has to go on for a long time and on an international level. And we saw that there's the individual level, the institutional level, and the society's level. So we all have to engage in this important area. I thank very much the technical team who made this work. I thank very, very much the panelists with all the very appreciated insights and comments and thoughts. I thank the audience who put questions and who hopefully take something with you and with all of us, so that we can continue and follow up on these important issues on having international cooperation, research and innovation with shared ethical values. Thank you so much and have wonderful continuing events.